welcome to episode 11 of the Simply Great Relationships podcast. We're so glad you could join us today. I'm Meredith Silversmith and this is Marina Varon, and today we are talking about micro-rejection. So we're going to be covering what is micro-rejection, if you don't already know, what causes it, how it impacts your relationship, how to prevent it, and what to do if this is a pattern you're seeing in your relationship. So make sure you stay with us till the very end because we've got a great bonus for you and we'll tell you how to get it. So Marina, what is micro-rejection?
I'm glad you asked. So micro-rejection is basically like sometimes when we think about rejection, we think about pretty like overt rejection. Mm-hmm. So like your partner approaches you for sex and you say no and you feel really rejected. Mm-hmm. A micro-rejection is a really small rejection that's really subtle, and unless you pay attention to it, you don't know that you're actually doing it, kind of like what you're doing right now.
Obviously, I wasn't doing that, but that is a micro-rejection.
Yeah, so a micro-rejection is literally the like picking up the cell phone in the middle of a conversation where you're not really overtly rejecting your partner, and it's not even super intentional. It's almost like habitual. But it is internalized as rejection because to your partner, it's like, well, obviously, for a second, your phone was more important than me.
Yeah.
And that does feel very rejecting. And, you know, people will not always be able to label that as rejection, but they will label it as frustration, as dismissal, as, you know, a lack of respect, as just something that's not kind.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, I think what's really important is keeping in mind what causes it, because I think the majority of the times this happens, it's not intentional. Like you said, it can be just a habitual thing. So some of the things that I know to cause it are just having a hectic life. I know we both have very busy schedules and lives, and so do our husbands. But, you know, between work and managing your home and, you know, children, things like that, there's so much to do in a day. That you're just trying to cram it all in and get things done so you can get to the end of the day.
Yeah.
Or you can relax. But if you just got home from work and you're seeing, you know, you're running into each other for the first time of the day, and the first thing you see is the back of your spouse's phone, it doesn't really make you feel very important.
Yeah, and it's really hard because, like, the notifications never stop, right? At least I know for both of us, that's very much the truth. Like, the notifications, the emails, never stop, and it's so tempting to just pick that phone up. But yeah, like, that's not a good feeling. The other one, it's pretty obvious, and I think I'm definitely guilty. I'll take ownership here, is, you know, our cultural obsession with social media, but like our personal obsession with social media, and this like kind of concept of scanning to see what your friends are doing, what better thing there's out there, like always comparing your in real life situation to like whatever someone's doing on social media, and it's almost like this zone out. Like I know when I go into that mode, it's almost like eyes glaze over, like I'm like scanning like a zombie, and I know it's not real. Yeah. But I think that's a big culprit, and I'd say Instagram's kind of like my guilty pleasure with that, but it's not even a pleasure.
Yeah. Definitely. I can own that and say I'm a bit guilty as well. I get sucked in and then I'm just oblivious to what's going on around me. So yeah. You know, I think another cause, and this is maybe a bit further down the line beyond these sort of habitual things that we've been talking about, is not feeling important to your partner. So if I have had the experience over the past 3 months of my partner, you know, seeing the back of their phone or seeing them on social media when I'm around, I might start to feel like I'm not important to them. And then in turn, I may start to sort of act in ways to communicate that back. Yeah. So I may choose to deprioritize my partner and pick up my phone, or choose to not respond when they say, hey, what do you want for dinner? Or, hey, come look at this. You know, it can be a way of communicating sort of this underlying feeling of not feeling important or valued.
Yeah, and I think just to add on to that, it's also like not having enough of those positive interactions. Like how many couples come in and sit on the couch and watch something they're only half paying attention to, and then they're on their phones, and there isn't enough positive interactions, and there's almost like a pattern of doing this sort of activity, and it doesn't feel good, but because there's like a lack of overall positive interactions, it's almost like I'd rather put no effort into this than put a little effort into a much more meaningful and positive interaction.
Yeah, absolutely. And this sort of rolls into the experience of taking your partner for granted, right? So we're sort of moving down the spectrum of how this progresses. If you're taking your partner for granted and you feel like they're always going to be there, and you're really busy right now, this day, this week, this month, this season, whatever, and you can make up for it later, don't worry about it, it's just right now, it's just temporary. Sometimes that's true, but unfortunately, because the things that distract us are so habitual, they become ingrained in our behavior, and they become, it's not just me as an individual living in a bubble checking my phone, it's me doing that for a period of time with consistency, my partner being affected by that, them creating their own behaviors as a result, which feed back to me, and now it's a habit, and now it's a dynamic in a relationship. Yeah. So the idea of feeling like you can make up for it or fix it later never comes. Exactly. Now it's the norm. And that's the ultimate, down the line, that's the cause.
Yeah, and I almost think like you can see that in even smaller ways with couples who like save the good times for Friday night or the weekend or the holiday, and it's like we're so busy during the week, we're not going to have a good time anyways, we're not going to communicate anyways. So it's like, if I can't have my, date night, I might as well be on my phone, or I might as well not really pay attention to what my partner is saying and send out these like really subtle micro rejections. But life is not going to get less busy. No. Life is not going to get less hectic, and you can't live your relationship 2 weekend days at a time.
No. And that's so sad, because as you're describing that, and I suspect you probably feel the same way, like, Tom and I don't do that. We really, we have fun pretty much every day. It's not necessarily the most fun thing, or going out to dinner, or going out to a movie, but, even if we're cooking together, or folding laundry together, or watching a show together, those are things that are fun. We make them fun.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I'll say this, George and I are a little guilty of falling into that trap of sitting at opposite ends of the couch on our social media and having these kind of really artificial and micro-rejecting conversations when we're both really stressed out. And that's something that we've been really working on in our relationship to, when we're stressed out, that does not reduce our stress. That actually makes us feel worse. Yeah. It's just the easy thing to do. The easy thing to do is rarely, the productive and produces the results you want thing to do. So we've been really actively working on that to especially at times when the stress is really high, to be very aware of on a Tuesday night taking our dog for a walk, or watching a funny movie together, but actually paying attention and having our cell phones away, and or playing a game, or going to the park, so that we're not getting caught in this trap, because I think it's so easy to make it a pattern. Yeah. You have 3 consecutive days in a row when you come home and you veg on the couch, and, instead of talking, or you're on the phone and your partner tries to interact with you, and you barely look up and go, huh? of course your partner is not going to want to continue the conversation. Right. So that's something we've been working on, and we've been like very diligent with that. But it's a work in progress, and I think like learning that this is what we were doing to each other, because we knew it felt bad, was like a really big step for us.
That's great. Definitely. So how it impacts the relationship, right? When you have these micro rejections going on over and over time. Basically, it makes your partner feel rejected, right? But it's so subtle and covert that you almost can't put your finger on it. Like, that's how I typically hear it from couples. Like, I know something feels off. I'm not happy. I don't feel good. They might say I don't feel loved or I don't feel important, but I just can't put my finger on why.
Yeah, and I hear it as like, oh, he's so rude.
Disrespectful.
Or, when really like, and this is where, going back to episode 1, communication, this is where you're doing all the don'ts, right? Like, you're doing like, you're doing this, you're making, instead of kind of identifying your own feeling and being able to communicate it. And it's almost like, I don't want to give people a free pass here, but it's really hard to always connect those dots of like, this action is actually making me feel rejected. But when you start to pay attention, like, it's a really good question to ask yourself. Like, when my partner picks up the phone when I'm telling them something, especially if I'm telling them something important, is the feeling that I'm getting, he's so rude, or is the feeling that I'm getting is like, I'm rejected right now?
Exactly.
So yeah, like, in that way, it's not as obvious, but it's definitely there. It's definitely rejected, and it's like, the more you feel rejected, or the more your partner feels rejected, the more you internalize that, like, the phone is more important than you. And the more you feel devalued, the more you feel like, I want to protect myself. I don't want to approach my partner as much, because that was really hard for me when I tried to have this like important emotional conversation with my partner, and they whipped out the phone in the middle to check what somebody from high school was, doing, what was posting on Instagram, right? Like, it's like saying I was vulnerable in that moment, and you made me feel like my vulnerability was less important than what somebody posted.
Yeah, for sure. And, it creates a lot of frustration, because especially when you can't put your finger on something and you can't quite say, like, well, this is why I feel the way I feel, that's frustrating in and of itself. Yeah. And for it to keep happening, it creates frustration, it creates distance, and it leads to both people doing it. That's, if you're going to do it to me, I'm going to do it back to you. If you don't take what I have to say as important, then I'm not going to take what you have to say as important. And it kind of starts this spiral in a negative direction.
Yeah, and it's a two-way street. Like, it's really like, I've never seen a relationship where it's one person who's like, completely doing the right thing, and one person who's constantly doing this. It becomes a pattern where you start doing this to each other. And in a way, like, that's contempt, right? Like, in a way, that's saying, I intentionally want to make you feel bad. Yeah. I intentionally want to make you feel unimportant. And, like, our big question is always like, is that how you want to feel in your relationship?
Not for me.
Not for me either, right? Like, that's the complete opposite of why we're in relationships and how we want to feel in them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So you may be listening to this and saying, oh boy, this is me, or this is my spouse. So we want to give you tips, right? Or you may be listening to it, hey, I hope you are, listening to it and saying, that's not us, we're doing everything right, and that's fantastic. So if that's you, we wanted to give you some ways to prevent it. So to prevent it from happening at all, or to prevent it from escalating further from where it is. So one of the biggest ways to do this is by implementing rituals of connection. We will talk about these all the time forever because they are some of the most powerful ways to create a positive energy and feelings in your relationship. So if you haven't already listened to episode 2, go back, listen to episode 2 on Rituals of Connection. There's a really good bonus with that one that has a suggested list of rituals that you can do. So definitely pop back there.
I'll add a little caveat to that list. All the things on that list are cell phone free.
Mm-hmm.
They're put your cell phone aside.
Yeah.
Type of ritual.
Definitely.
So another really, really great tip is just to be aware of turning towards each other. And this is a concept I love so much, that like when your partner puts a bid out there, and a bid is just like a little small call for connection or attention, to always be aware of that. And, you know, like turning towards each other and paying attention to your partner's bids is not saying yes to them. It's not like, hey babe, can you get me a coffee? And the response has to be yes for a bid to be acknowledged.
Right.
It's more like, hey, yeah, sure, I want a coffee also, right? It's just acknowledging that your partner's trying to connect with you in that moment. And it's an attempt to share your inner world with each other. And again, like there's some vulnerability in that. And when you know that if you're going to approach your partner and you're going to make a little bid for connection, that the likely, like, 99% of the time, or even less, like 80% of the time, or 85% of the time, your partner's going to say, like, hey, I'm right here. That brings a lot of security and trust into your relationship, as opposed to, like, when you say, like, hey, babe, I'm right here, and you get...
Yeah. That's very triggering for me. That's definitely one that is not fun. I even break it down as small as, like, hey, babe, yeah? Like, just that.
Yeah.
Because that's turning towards, right? If your partner calls you and says, hey, you, whatever you guys call each other, just say, yeah, what? What's going on? You know, respond. And it sounds so silly, but if you start to pay attention, you'd be shocked at how often we all sort of like miss those moments because we're involved in something else.
Sure. And I just want to add on to that, like, yeah is not yeah. Yeah. Like, I always tell my couples that yeah should come with a little eye contact. Like, not a ton, but just, like, at least look at the person and acknowledge you're talking to them, because sometimes, like, this yeah gets a little lost in translation. It's a put the phone down. Like, look at your partner. Show them, like, you're present and I'm present here in the same moment.
Definitely. So, if you were listening to this and you feel like this is all happening in your relationship and what do I do? We have it covered. We're going to talk about it right now. So, the first step is to identify it for yourself. Right? So not pointing fingers at your partner, looking at yourself, looking at your own behavior and saying, okay, what am I doing? When am I doing this? And what am I doing? It's probably around the phone or laptop, for some reason electronics, right? I don't know how many of us are like deeply engrossed in a book and ignoring our partner, even if we are a reader. So pay attention to when it happens and ask yourself, like, what am I doing? So if you're reaching for your phone or something else in the middle of a conversation, or you're engrossed in something when your partner's trying to reach out to you, ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? Right? Because there are some different possibilities. Am I feeling overwhelmed? Do I feel like I need to get out of this conversation or avoid it in some way? Am I feeling triggered by something in this conversation? Am I feeling triggered by just my partner's presence? Because sometimes that can happen. Do you feel bored? Do you feel rejected? Ask yourself those questions to try to develop some awareness around what's creating the action. And then afterwards, ask yourself, how did you feel after you disengaged? Like, was it relieving? Was it stressful? Was it comforting? Was it rewarding? Like, what did that accomplish for you? Because if you can get a better understanding of what it's doing for you, we can sort of find an alternate way of achieving that same goal.
Yeah, because like this action has some sort of gain. We wouldn't all be going to that all the time if we didn't. And the thing is, right now, probably we're not paying attention.
Right.
And paying attention and figuring out what we're getting from that, and is that the best way to actually get it, is really, really important.
Mm-hmm.
The next thing is to like identify it and discuss it with your partner. So like to really be able to own it.
Mm-hmm.
So again, going back to episode 1, going back to communication tip sheet, to be able to own it and to say like, I've noticed this in myself, and explore like what your partner's experience has been. Give them the platform and discuss it together and discuss what you can do better.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe also insert like an I'm sorry, this was not my intention to do this. You know, it's a really, really powerful conversation.
Yeah.
And I think the more you're able to kind of own it and discuss it, talk about it, the more you're aware of like not doing it.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean like you never get to go on social media. It doesn't. That's not the message we're trying to send here.
Yeah.
It just means that when you're having partner time and when you're having, you know, a meaningful conversation, or when you're engaged in something, you're not being a jerk and micro-rejecting your partner, and your partner's not being a jerk to you and micro-rejecting you by doing something that's like kind of trivial, redundant, and very FOMO-based. So we don't just want you to listen, we want you to listen and to integrate this into your relationship. So we've put together our top 10 tips for preventing micro-rejection in a PDF for you, and you can get it at simplygreatrelationships.com/011.
Mm-hmm. Definitely go get that. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Definitely a good one. So takeaways. What is your takeaway, Marina?
My takeaway is that I think that like a lot of preventing this or shifting this in your relationship starts with doing that individual questioning of like, what am I really getting out of that moment that like I disengaged from a conversation with my partner and pick up my phone? Because like there is some sort of reason why I'm doing it, and it's really important to identify that. So my big takeaway is like, it needs to start with self-exploration, not finger-pointing of like, you always do this, how can you be so disrespectful?
That's a good one. I think for me, it's more the eye contact thing, like the smaller moments, because I feel like I'm aware of the bigger ones, but those small moments even where you are responding, right? So you're saying, yeah, what's up, you know, but even if you are still engaged in something else, it can still feel like a micro-rejection. I think that's really significant to keep in mind.
Yeah, because you're not really from behind the phone. You're in eye contact with your phone.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, that's a really, really good one. So that's all for today. We hope that you take these tips and start using them right away. This is really one you can start using right away. We'd love for you to continue the conversation with us in our Facebook group. We'll be there to hook you up with more tips, with live streams, with Q&As. So you can find us at Facebook /groups/Simply Great Relationships, or you can click the link on our webpage, simplygreatrelationships.com. We will see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.